This is Dr. Hamilton. Welcome to my video series on William Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. In this video, I'd like to discuss the theme of deception. So the theme of deception is very important in Much Ado About Nothing, but it relates to another important theme, which is the passion of love. And love in the play is seen as taking the characters into a realm of higher danger and vulnerability, where they can be deceived, both by external agents acting upon them from the outside with malevolent or benevolent intentions, and also by their own lack of insight, either into themselves or into other people. So there's those two levels of deception that can take place, and that are all hinge around the passion and the emotion of love. So as a consequence of this higher level of threat and danger, two main characters emerge as external influencers, and that is Don Pedro and Don John. So Don Pedro is an influence generally for the good, and Don John for evil. But both of these characters use deception to achieve their goals: overt manipulation, explicit deception. So Don John has two plots to undermine Claudio and Hero's marriage. Don Pedro's deception is benevolent, but he also engages in two distinct acts of deception in the play. One is the plot to court Hero in disguise on behalf of Claudio, and then later it is to trick Beatrice and Benedick into falling in love with one another. So in addition to these overt acts of deception, there is the dramatic device of the ball, the masked ball, in which all the characters relate to each other wearing masks. It's a very strange situation because, oddly enough, they seem to be able to recognize each other with the masks on, but nonetheless, the masks create confusion and foreground this theme of deception. And the masked ball is the place from which a higher amount of confusion occurs, and where the germ of jealousy is planted into Claudio's brain by Don John. He takes advantage of the deception of the masked ball in order to do that. So the passion of love is really depicted as, I said, a test of character, okay? A test as to whether or not you have insight into other people, a test as to whether or not you have insight into yourself. Claudio's failure to judge Hero's character accurately makes him a prey, the prey of Don John. His lack of insight into himself is what eventually leads him into this catastrophic rupture with Hero at the wedding. And it is Beatrice and Benedick's failure to acknowledge or understand their own love for one another, their own insight into their own emotions, that leads them into the ridiculous sort of humiliation, sort of benevolent humiliation by Don Pedro when he tricks them into falling in love with one another, or into expressing their love for one another. So again, in both of these instances, it is just the inability to judge that leads to confusion, catastrophe, and ridicule. And the implication is really that one's destiny, whether it's going to be happy or not, really depends on one's ability to judge situations, one's ability to judge other people, and oneself. Hence one's susceptibility to manipulation by others. The symbol of this in Shakespeare's time would have been the Silenus box. The Silenus box, it sounds very strange, but it is an image that comes up in Plato's Symposium. Plato is a Greek philosopher, and the Symposium is probably um, his most famous work. It includes a dialogue with Socrates. In the Symposium, uh, Alcibiades compares Socrates, who is considered an incredibly wise man and a great philosopher. He compares Socrates to a statue that is ugly and hollow, but contains a gold statues on the inside. And so Socrates is described with a snuffly nose and a peasant face on the surface. He's a blockhead, a bumpkin, but inside he has the deepest wisdom. And that is revealed again and again throughout the dialogues. And so, this idea of like a box that is ugly on the outside but contains the real gold, that is an image that really stuck in Shakespeare's head, and it comes up in this play a lot as we look at this, the difference between appearance and reality. The and we understand that a character's wisdom, their ability to achieve happiness, really depends on their ability to understand the difference between what is real and what is not, to navigate this world of deception, of higher danger that love takes these characters into. So we can look, for example, at Claudio. Claudio appears first as what we might call at the time, what Shakespeare would regard at the time as a typical lover. He uses courtly language of the Petrarchan sonnet. Now, Francesco Petrarca was a 14th century Italian poet, and his love sonnets set the model for romantic love during the Renaissance period in Europe. And it's hard to overestimate how profound Petrarch's influence is, but if you could just think of it as like the tropes of, or the rules, the model for love at that time, then I think you'll get a good idea. And the idea was that a lover was supposed to exhibit certain types of traits, and one of the things that that a lover did was to idealize the beloved, to compare them to the stars, to compare them to gold and all the noble metals, and that was just what a lover did. And so we actually hear Claudio at the very beginning in Act 1, Scene 1, really looking like a Petrarchan lover. He compares Hero to a jewel. He says, "Can the world buy such a jewel?" It sounds like an innocent little line there, but what it's suggesting this idealizing language from the Petrarchan love sonnets. But it turns out, actually, if we think of the Silenus box metaphor, that Claudio is actually consumed by jealousy, and actually, even after Hero dies, he believes that Hero dies after he rejects her publicly. His love is so shallow that he just immediately forgets about her. And so, despite the fact that all of his violent protestations of love, and of course later on he'll ask for forgiveness, but there's no sign that Claudio really changes in the end. So the lover who courts what we might say by the book, right? He seems to be the, doing everything that lovers are expected to do. Is actually the opposite of a Silenus box. He looks great on the outside, but inside he's really unworthy and hollow, shallow, and simply not worthy of Hero's love. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Benedict's love seems to be a relationship, seems to be a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe. I mean, you could almost say that Beatrice and Benedict's relationship is a satire on the most unendurable aspect of marriage, fighting. But in fact, they harbor real love for one another. And you know, initially they either through pride or lack of insight in themselves refuse to acknowledge it, but eventually it's borne out. There's a wonderful line to continue with this Petrarchan allusion, and remember, an allusion is when a writer refers to a work that is outside of the work of art that they are in. So and that adds additional meaning and significance to the work. So later on, this idea of the Petrarchan sonnet and what a lover is supposed to do comes up again when Benedict declares his love for Beatrice, but he laments that he was not born under a rhyming planet at Act 5, Scene 2, lines 30 to 40, um, because he can't write poetry. Um, the kind of imagery that seems to come to Claudio spontaneously doesn't really come to Benedict. Um, and so, I mean, you know, he's exactly the opposite. He can't do, he's a catastrophe. He can't do the things that a normal lover can do, and yet we know that his love for Beatrice is true. He detects Hero's innocence underneath despite her dramatic rejection by Claudio and the accusation of Claudio and Don Pedro, um, and his authentic love is really tested by a very very significant dramatic crisis. And it lives beneath the rough exterior. So you could say that Benedict is sort of like a Socrates in this example from the Silenus illusion. So let's discuss the mass ball for a minute. The mass ball, of course, uh, is a dramatic device that really dramatizes the difficulty in discerning between true friends and enemies, and it dramatizes the difficult that love plunges these characters into. Everybody's wearing a disguise. How do you tell who's who, what's what? It's incredibly disorienting. Who has malevolent purposes? Who has benevolent purposes? Um, and you know, in a deeper sense, this dramatizes the central problem of love, that one's destiny, one's future happiness is determined by one's ability to peer beneath the mask and judge the heart of the one that you love. Um, and so the Silenus box really frames this question of appearance and reality. And it's evoked in this very funny encounter between the prince and Hero. This is an encounter that is full of allusions again. Um, so bear with me. Um, so Hero meets the prince, Don Pedro, at the mass ball. They're both wearing masks, and they have this exchange. Remember, Hero believes at this point that the prince is actually courting her and asking for her hand in marriage, because the prince's initial deception has led to her belief. Um, but Hero says, "God defend the lute should be like the case." A lute was a stringed instrument, and the case would be what holds it. Again, we have the Silenus box, the lute inside the case. And Don Pedro responds with this allusion. "My visor is Philemon's roof. Within the house is Jove." It sounds very high blown. It sounds very fancy, very courtly. But he's making an important allusion here. Hero responds, "Why then your visor should be thatched." So let's unpack this. So Hero's making a joke about Don Pedro's mask, suggesting that she hopes that his own face is not as hideous as his mask. God defend the lewd be like the case. Don Pedro responds by comparing his visor, his mask, to Philemon's roof. So there's the allusion. The allusion is to Philemon, who is a character in the famous Roman poet Ovid's most famous work, The Metamorphoses. And The Metamorphoses is a book that is full of mythology. It recounts the mythology of the time. And one of the mythological stories has a character named Philemon. Philemon and his wife Baucis are elderly, impoverished couple, and they are visited by an old peasant, and they welcome him into their cottage. And of course, the old peasant turns out to be the king of the gods himself, Jove. So when he says, "My visor is Philemon's roof, within the house is Jove," he's saying that my mask is like the roof that belongs, the cottage that belongs to Philemon and Baucis. Inside it is the king of the gods. And incidentally, Don Pedro himself is sort of a godlike figure in this play, and he's really evoking both Ovid's Metamorphoses and also the Silenus box in this complicated allusion. And what he's saying is that the gold that you seek is inside a humble roof, has a humble exterior. So he's sort of the voice of wisdom speaking, the voice of the Silenus box, the treasure that you seek, the treasure of love, the treasure of a happy, fulfilled destiny is underneath a humble roof. So this is going to be a theme, as we say, it's explicitly stated there, that will continue throughout the play. Regarding the love that Claudio, of course, does not recognize. He's mistrustful of Beatrice. I mean, he's mistrustful, of Hero from the very start. He immediately, although he begins by praising Hero to the skies, right? Giving with all of this Petrarchan love analogies. He also says that he doesn't really trust his judgment about Hero's modesty from the very, very beginning. When he talks to Benedick, is she not a modest young lady? He asks Benedick. So again, he can't see whether she is true or false, and so he's looking to Benedick to tell him, that she is true. And of course, Benedick, because he's consumed by his philosophy of misogyny, simply mocks Claudio for asking the question, says that Hero's ugly, and so and so forth, and whether or not that plants the seed in Claudio that what he already believed, that women are somehow by definition untrue or not, is not clear. Benedick could have been acting out of jealousy. He's not jealous. He's just a misogynist. But Claudio's mistrust of himself continues, and he accepts Don Pedro's proposal to court Hero on his behalf. It just seems so weird that he does this because he's too insecure to ask her for her hand in marriage for himself. And although this seems like an innocent act of deception, it's something that's revealed immediately. This initial deception leads, as I mentioned earlier, to a chain reaction. It's the domino that tumbles down all of the other events that lead to the catastrophe of the wedding. So in this play, one deception, innocent deception, leads to another. And it's actually the seeds of the deception aren't actually with Don John. The seeds of deception are with the good characters, so to speak. Um, so Don Pedro's plan that he gives or he makes to his proposal to Claudio is, the deception immediately has an effect because it's overheard and misconstrued by Leonato's servant, who then tells Leonato that that Don Pedro himself is going to be courting Hero. And so suddenly there's a confusion between whether Claudio's courting Hero or Don Pedro's courting Hero. And so the prospect of one man being replaced by another and by, consequently adultery is already in play with this initial deception. So this creates the initial confusion. And that Don John and Borachio seize upon to create seeds of doubt in that initial scene that are later capitalized on when Don John makes the explicit accusation of Hero that she is disloyal. And it leads to Claudio's eruption of jealousy. So So Benedict at the mass ball, with his habitual cynicism, comes to the same conclusion that Don John and Borachio are trying to insinuate into Claudio. He sees, he doesn't know what's going on, and so he sees Don Pedro courting Hero. And he thinks that Don Pedro has asked her to marry himself. And so, so at the end of the mass ball, both Benedict, who is generally thought of as being reliable, and Claudio are both deceived. Both of them leave the mass ball, which is sort of this symbol of the difficulty of discerning between deception and reality. Both of them leave the ball more deceived than when they first came in. And of course, it gets rectified initially because Claudio is told the truth, and Don Pedro reveals that Hero has been won for him, that he's asked her for her marriage on his behalf. But again, the seeds of doubt have already been sown. Like I said, as the plot unfolds, we wish that Claudio would be sort of enlightened, but he's not. Claudio is saved, if we might call it that. It's actually really more Hero that's saved than Claudio, because Claudio is an idiot and sort of irredeemable. But Hero, we could say, and Claudio are somehow saved through the agency of Dogberry and Vergis, who are these manifestly incompetent characters who resolve to, they're the night watch, the police officers, and they resolve to undertake their patrolling by doing exactly the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing, by letting criminals free and by not arresting people. But somehow they actually are the humble vehicle that discovers the plot when the wise people are unable to discover what actually has happened. Once again, the Silenus box, the humble appearance reveals the inner wisdom. So Borachio concludes in utter exasperation, "What your wisdoms could not discover, these shallow fools have brought to light," in Act 5, Scene 1, lines 219 to 20. So once again, humble exterior becomes the agent of truth. Claudio also benefits, we might say, or we should say, from Hero's self-sacrifice, or maybe we could think of it's her ability, her desire to restore her reputation. So with the central plot, what we think is the central romantic plot, right? There's two plots, like a Salinas box. There are two layers. There's the outside and there's the inside, right? Um, on the outside, so we have the overt, explicit plot. That looks like the most significant plot is Claudius, right? Claudius and Hero, the romantic plot between Claudius and Hero. That plot is not satisfying. And as I said, despite Claudio's pleas for forgiveness and his abjection in front of Hero's supposed tomb, he doesn't learn really anything because he's not hurt by what happened, truly. When it really matters, Claudius does not defend Hero. He laughs at her father when her father sees him and is in grief and tries to shame him. He's impervious when it really matters. Even when Benedict threatens him, declares that he's going to fight him in a duel. He can't bring himself to take it seriously. However, the interior plot, the subplot, the seeming subplot, Beatrice and Benedict, in that plot, true love is actually realized. So, Benedict's love of Beatrice undergoes a real test, whereas Claudio's love does undergo a test. He fails the test. Benedict, when Beatrice tells him, kill Claudio, he senses that Hero, he does it out of love. He also senses that perhaps that Hero is innocent, and as we said in earlier video, he shatters the false toxic male relationships that have really deluded the other characters. And so this play, the arch misogynist, Final Irony, becomes the defender of a woman's modesty. So the guy who's been railing at the beginning that all women are untrue, all women are essentially untrustworthy, they're all adulteresses, they're going to cheat on you, he's the one who's ready to die to defend a woman's honesty. So what we find is that this test, underneath Benedict's cynicism and misogyny, there is truly something worthy after all. So thank you guys for listening, and I look forward to seeing you guys for the next video.